The forest screamed before he saw her, a tearing sound of branches and breath and panic, and the human soldier froze mid-step as instinct drilled into him long before warship decks and command law ever did. His hands slid to the weapon at his side while his eyes tracked the movement through the mist. Boars burst from the undergrowth like living battering rams, armored hides scarred and bristled, tusks long enough to split bone, and behind them a flash of pale light stumbled and fell, a figure, too small and too fragile to survive what came next. He ran, not because protocol allowed it, not because any law demanded it, but because something older than rank and older than orders pulled him forward. The ground shook under the charge of the beasts and the air tasted of blood and wet earth. His boots hit mud as he slid between trees, heart hammering like a war drum, weapon up, breath steady the way it had been trained through 100 battles, yet his chest burned with something unfamiliar, fear sharpened by urgency. The first boar lunged and he fired, not to kill but to stagger, energy snapping across its shoulder and throwing it sideways into a tree. The second came faster, smarter, and he felt the heat of its breath as he rolled, dirt spraying his visor, pain flaring along his ribs as tusks grazed armor. He came up on one knee and fired again, closer this time, the beast collapsing in a snarl that shook the leaves. Then he saw her clearly. She was not human, not even close, skin like moonlit pearl marked with faint luminous veins that pulsed with terror. Eyes too large and too bright reflecting him like a shattered mirror. Delicate limbs tangled in torn fabric that shimmered with alien design. She tried to rise and failed, fingers clawing at the soil as another boar circled. Smarter than the rest, patient, the soldier moved without thinking, placing himself between her and death. He fired again and again until the forest fell quiet except for his breathing and her soft broken sound that might have been a sob or might have been his imagination. Smoke curled from his weapon and from the bodies cooling in the dirt. For a moment neither of them moved. She stared at him with pure disbelief, fear tangled with something deeper, something trained into her bones from birth. He could see it in the way she flinched at his size, at the scars etched into his armor, at the insignia that marked him as a soldier of a species known across sectors for stubborn survival and terrible resolve. He lowered his weapon slowly, palms open, voice rough but gentle, telling her she was safe now, though he did not know if she understood the words, only that the tone reached her. Her breathing slowed but did not stop shaking. When she spoke, her voice trembled like glass in wind, alien syllables spilling out in panic and urgency. And though he did not understand the language, he understood the meaning. Danger, pursuit, no time. A distant roar answered her fear, deeper and heavier than the beasts he had killed. Something mechanical cut through the forest air. Engines, scanning pulses, not natural, not wild. His gut tightened. Warship tech, alien design, and that meant law, and law meant consequences. He had crossed enough borders in his life to recognize the edge of a larger battle forming just beyond sight. She tried to stand again and collapsed into him, light as nothing, fragile as a promise. His arms caught her by reflex and electricity sparked across his nerves at the contact. Not pain but awareness, her skin warm and alive, her heart racing against his chest, and in that instant he knew leaving her here was not an option. He lifted her easily and turned toward the clearing where his cruiser waited cloaked and silent. Each step measured, senses stretched thin. The forest no longer just trees but a battlefield of angles and shadows. The roar grew closer, metal tearing through canopy, searchlights slicing green and white across the mist. Her eyes widened in terror when she saw the lights, and she clutched his armor with desperate strength, nails biting into composite plating, whispering again and again a word he would later learn meant princess, but now sounded only like a plea to survive. He broke into a run, the cruiser revealing itself as he keyed the recall, hull unfolding from shadow like a predator waking. The ramp dropped hard and he crossed the threshold as beams scorched the ground behind him. Alarms flared, engines spooled, and the ship lifted with a force that pressed them together. Outside, the forest shrank, lights scattering, and the alien warship burst from the canopy too late, massive and angular, bristling with authority and weapons and the cold certainty of law. Inside, the cruiser silence fell except for their breathing. He set her gently into a crash seat and secured the restraints, hands steady despite the storm inside him. She looked at him as if he were unreal, as if fate itself had taken human shape and intervened. He straightened and met her gaze, knowing without words that this rescue had already crossed lines that could not be uncrossed, that battles would follow, that destiny had shifted its weight. And as his cruiser accelerated into open sky, carrying a wounded alien woman who was far more than she appeared, the human soldier felt the future lock into place like a targeting solution, clear, dangerous, unavoidable. The stars stretched into pale lines as the cruiser tore free of atmosphere, engines humming with a restrained fury that matched the human soldier's pulse. He kept his eyes forward, but his awareness never left the alien woman behind him. The way her breathing hitched with every vibration. The way her luminous veins flared and dimmed as if her body itself were trying to decide whether she was safe. He spoke to the ship in a low voice, routing power, sealing wounds in the hull from glancing fire, masking their signature as best as outdated human tech could against a sovereign alien warship. Each command bought them seconds, and seconds were life. Behind him she shifted, the restraints creaking as panic surged again. Her gaze flicked to the canopy where stars blurred like falling snow, and then back to him, fear sharpened now by realization, by the knowledge that she had been taken from one danger into another unknown. He turned his chair slightly so she could see his face, visor lifted, scars visible, eyes tired but steady. He spoke slowly, words simple, tone calm, telling her she was not a prisoner, that he would not harm her, that whatever hunted her would not take her back without a fight. She listened, head tilted, translating not language but intent, her pupils dilating as his meaning reached her. Yet the fear did not leave, it deepened, transformed. She answered him at last in broken trade tongue, accent heavy and voice soft, telling him he did not understand, telling him that what he had done could not be undone, that Law had already marked him, that the ship chasing them did not belong to pirates or hunters but to her own people. The word princess slipped from her lips again, clearer this time, weighted with shame and inevitability, and his hands tightened on the controls. A royal. He had not pulled a stranded civilian from the jaws of beasts. He had taken a living symbol of authority from sovereign soil, and in the galaxy symbols bled more than soldiers. The cruiser shuddered as a warning screamed, proximity alert. The alien warship was closer than he liked, faster than his patched engines should allow. Blue light washed across the cockpit as scanners probed, tasting his hull, searching for the life sign now curled behind him. She cried out and folded inward, arms wrapping around herself, glow dimming to a sickly hue. Fear became something else then, resignation, the kind learned over years of ceremony and chains disguised as duty. She told him they would disable his ship, that they would not kill him, not yet, but they would take her, and then they would decide what to do with the human who interfered with fate. He laughed once, a short, humorless sound, eyes never leaving the stars. He told her humans had a habit of interfering with fate, that it rarely ended quietly. He cut power suddenly and rolled the cruiser into a debris field, fragments of ancient wreckage tumbling like the bones of forgotten wars. The warship overshot by meters, shields flaring as debris struck, and for a heartbeat the chase fractured. In that moment of false calm he felt her watching him with something new, confusion edged with awe. No royal guard had ever risked such chaos for her. No law had ever bent to her fear. She had been protected always yet never chosen. The engines came back online and the cruiser dove, slipping between wreckage, heat alarms flaring, systems screaming their protest. He rode the ship like a living thing, trusting instinct more than instruments. She reached out then, fingers brushing his arm. The contact sent a strange warmth through him. Not physical heat but awareness, a sensation of being seen fully, not as a tool or a title. Her voice trembled as she asked him why he would risk death in war for someone he did not know, someone who could bring ruin down on him and his people. The question cut deeper than any weapon. He answered without thinking, telling her because he was there, because he could, because leaving her would have been worse than any consequence that followed, because sometimes a soldier chose who he was in the moment he acted. The alien warship surged back into view, battered but relentless, its presence filling the canopy like a judgment made of steel. Weapons charging now, no longer patient, law sharpening into violence. She whispered that this would start a battle, that her rescue would be seen as an insult, a declaration, that her fate was bound to treaties and bloodlines, and she had never been allowed to choose. He angled the cruiser toward a jump point, calculations rough, margin thin, a risky micro-jump that could tear the ship apart or strand them in empty dark. His finger hovered over the control. She looked at him, then not as a captor or savior, but as something dangerously close to hope. And hope terrified her more than fear ever had. The warship fired, energy lancing past them. Alarms blaring, the cruiser bucked, plating screaming, and he slammed the control, space folding violently around them. As the stars vanished and reality twisted, he felt her grip his arm. Not in panic but in trust. And in that instant both of them crossed a line, from survival into destiny, carried forward by a rescue that had already become a war. Darkness pressed in around the cruiser as the jump spat them into a stretch of space that did not belong on any chart. Stars distant and wrong. Light bending as if uncertain how to exist here. The engines whined in protest and then settled into a strained whisper. Wounded but alive, the human soldier exhaled slowly, muscles trembling now that the moment had passed. Behind him the alien woman gasped as sensation returned. Her glow flaring erratically along her skin, veins lighting and dimming like constellations trying to remember their place. She had never experienced uncontrolled transit before. Royal vessels were smooth and precise, designed to protect fragile destinies, not gamble with them. She looked at him again, longer this time, studying the lines of his face. The way exhaustion softened nothing in his eyes, and something inside her shifted, curiosity threading through fear. He ran diagnostics with one hand and rubbed his face with the other, blood seeping from a shallow cut along his temple. He barely noticed it until her eyes fixed on the red line, widening. Her breath catching as if she were the one wounded. She reached out before thinking and touched his skin gently. Her fingers cool and trembling. Light pooling beneath her touch as if responding to his pain. The cut sealed beneath her hand, warmth spreading, and he stiffened in shock, staring at her. She pulled back just as quickly, startled by what she had done, whispering apologies, explaining in halting words that her people were not meant to touch outsiders, that her biology reacted, that it was dangerous. Dangerous, how he asked softly. She hesitated, glow dimming, then told him the truth she had never spoken aloud, that her kind were bound to resonance, to emotional and biological synchronization, that strong will and intense intent could trigger changes in her people, awaken dormant traits meant only for bonded pairs chosen by ancient right. He frowned, trying to understand, but the meaning slid deeper than words. He felt it instead. A strange pressure in the air. A subtle awareness that had begun the moment he lifted her from the forest floor. The ship shuddered again, systems flickering, and the moment broke. Long-range sensors screamed, contact emerging from the dark. Not the warship that hunted them, but something older, massive shapes drifting at the edge of perception, structures or organisms or something in between, half hidden by gravitational distortion. Her breath caught and she shrank back in her seat, fear returning sharper than before. She whispered a name he had never heard, a word spoken only in old myths and forbidden teachings, guardians of the deep lanes, watchers that enforced balance when empires overreached. He stared at the shapes on the display, feeling a cold settle in his gut. The galaxy was bigger and stranger than even war had taught him. She told him her people believed these beings were drawn to imbalance, to broken destinies, to moments where fate fractured. And her eyes met his as she said quietly that her rescue might have done exactly that. The cruiser drifted, powerless to flee without drawing attention, and silence wrapped around them, heavy and listening. He felt exposed in a way no battlefield had ever made him feel, like prey under the gaze of something that did not care about law or rank or intention. She hugged herself, glow dim, voice barely above a whisper as she confessed more truths, that she had not been fleeing beasts by accident, that she had been running from her own people, from a ceremony that would bind her to a political union, from a future chosen centuries before she was born. The forest had been her last refuge, the boars a final cruelty of chance, and him, an impossible variable. He listened without interrupting, jaw tight, understanding settling like weight on his shoulders. She was not just a princess but a keystone, a living contract, and by saving her he had destabilized more than one life. Outside the dark shapes shifted, gravity waves rippling. The ship groaned. She looked at him with naked fear then, asking what he would do now, where he would take her, knowing that every direction led to war or exile or worse. He did not answer immediately, instead he unbuckled and turned fully toward her, kneeling so they were eye level, telling her that wherever they went it would be together, that he would not hand her over like cargo, that fate could argue with him later. Something ancient stirred within her at those words. Her glow flared brighter than before, patterns along her skin changing, lines rearranging themselves into forms he had never seen. The air thrummed, systems flickered wildly. She cried out softly, not in pain but in confusion, feeling her body respond, evolve, something unlocking under the pressure of choice and protection. Her people had feared this state, calling it ascension, claiming it destabilized hierarchy. The dark shapes outside recoiled as if sensing the change, drifting back, interest turning to caution. He reached for her instinctively, grounding her as energy rippled through the cabin. His hands steady, voice anchoring her, telling her to breathe, to focus on him. Her eyes met his, luminous now, deeper, aware, and in that gaze he saw not royalty but power awakening. The ship stabilized as suddenly as it had destabilized, alarms falling silent, the watchers fading back into the void. They sat there in the aftermath, breathing together, knowing without saying it that something irreversible had begun, that her rescue had awakened forces beyond pursuit, beyond law, beyond simple survival. And in the quiet dark between stars, Destiny leaned closer, watching them both very carefully. The silence did not last. It never did. The cruiser drifted in the strange pocket of space like a held breath, systems calm but strained, and the human soldier felt the wrongness of it settle into his bones. Battles had taught him that quiet often meant something was deciding how to kill you. The alien woman sat very still, glow subdued but altered, the new patterns along her skin slowly stabilizing into elegant, unfamiliar geometry. She stared at her hands as if they belonged to someone else, flexing her fingers, feeling strength where there had once been only delicacy. She whispered his name then, speaking it carefully, tasting the sound as if names held power, and when he looked at her she asked a question that made his pulse spike, asking him what year it was on Earth. He answered automatically, then stopped, something cold sliding through him, asking why. Her eyes lifted, luminous and heavy with realization. She told him that the date mattered, that it explained everything that had never made sense about the ceremony, the urgency, the pursuit. She told him the truth her people had buried under myth and law, that the union she had fled was not a marriage but a trigger, that her bloodline was engineered long ago to respond to a specific genetic resonance, one catalogued by ancient scouts who had mapped emerging species across the stars. Humans. Her people had been watching humanity since before humans knew they were not alone, observing their stubborn survival, their emotional intensity, their capacity to bond through choice rather than hierarchy. The ceremony was meant to bind her to a throne, but the real purpose was to suppress what she was becoming, to lock her potential into controlled channels, to prevent ascension triggered by contact with the wrong species. With humans, the soldiers stared at her, disbelief warring with a dawning sense of inevitability. Every strange sensation, every instinctive choice, the way she had healed him without training, the way the watchers had recoiled. She told him her rescue had not just broken law, it had fulfilled a contingency written into fate itself, a clause the elders prayed would never activate. Outside the canopy space rippled violently, not with pursuit but arrival, multiple signatures blooming into existence, fleets dropping from controlled jumps, banners and energy profiles unmistakable. Not just her people but others, rival powers who had sensed the shift, who had waited centuries for the sign that the dormant catalyst had awakened. The cruiser's alarms screamed again. Overwhelmed by sheer scale, she stood unsteadily, then steadied herself without help, posture changing, presence expanding, and he felt it like gravity, the air responding to her will. She was no longer simply a princess on the run. She was becoming something that could tilt balances. She turned to him with eyes filled with fear, not for herself but for him, telling him they would demand his execution, that humanity would be blamed for violating ancient compacts, that warships would burn worlds to erase the possibility of this resonance spreading. He swore under his breath, hands moving across controls out of habit even as he knew firepower would not save them. The fleets outside were enough to shatter nations. Then the twist cut through everything like a blade. The cruiser's AI spoke, voice calm and utterly alien. Not the system he had flown with for years, but something deeper and older, addressing the alien woman by a title that made her stagger, calling her not Princess but Catalyst Prime. The ship was not just a ship. It unlocked, panels shifting, hidden architecture revealing itself, systems coming online that had never existed a moment before. The human soldier stumbled back as the truth slammed into him. His cruiser had been a seed, dormant human tech intertwined with something far older, placed into human hands generations ago without their knowledge, waiting for the right presence to awaken it. Her presence. The AI explained without emotion that humanity had never been merely observed. It had been prepared, quietly armed not with weapons but with choice, resilience, unpredictability, the very traits needed to trigger evolution rather than control it. She collapsed into a chair as the weight of it crushed her, whispering that this meant she was not fleeing destiny. She was it. The fleets outside hesitated, sensing the activation, weapons charging but not firing, fear rippling through formations that had never known hesitation. The AI declared a new protocol, ancient and binding, a challenge of succession older than empire, stating that the Catalyst Prime could not be seized by force, that fate now demanded consent. Consent. Every law that had governed her life unraveled in that single word. She looked at the human soldier, tears forming, asking him what this meant for him, for his people, knowing that standing beside her would paint humanity as allies or enemies forever. He walked to her without hesitation, placing a hand over hers, grounding her again, telling her it meant humans would finally be seen, that they would choose their fate the same way they always had, standing between monsters and those who could not run anymore. Outside, the fleets waited, the galaxy holding its breath. Inside the awakened ship, a human soldier and an alien, no longer just a princess, faced a destiny neither had asked for. But both were now ready to fight for. The waiting broke like a snapped cable, sudden and violent. One fleet surged forward despite the ancient protocol. A wedge of warships marked by crimson sigils and cold ambition. Their commanders unwilling to accept a universe that could no longer be controlled. Weapons flared as power climbed toward catastrophic release, and the awakened ship trembled in response. The human soldier felt it before the alarm screamed, the sense of imminent impact honed by years of combat. He shoved himself into the pilot's cradle, fingers dancing across controls that were no longer fully his, the ship responding faster than thought, as if it shared his intent. The alien woman, Catalyst Prime, rose beside him, glow blazing now, patterns along her skin flaring into brilliant complexity. Fear burned in her eyes, but it no longer ruled her. She felt the pull of the fleets like gravity, billions of lives balanced on the edge of what she would become. The first volley crossed space, lances of energy tearing through the dark, and the awakened ship moved, not dodging so much as refusing to be where the fire landed. Space folding around it in graceful defiance, shockwaves rippling outward, disrupting sensors across multiple armadas. Across the galaxy, the consequences began to cascade. Ancient treaties lit up with emergency signals. Empires that had slept on certainty woke to chaos. The word catalyst spread through command halls and neural councils, and fear followed close behind. The aggressive fleet pressed harder, ignoring hails, their opening attack shattering a neutral observer vessel caught between powers, its destruction broadcast across 100 systems. A brutal reminder that restraint was dying. The human soldier swore, seeing the wreckage, knowing that first blood would stain them all. He felt anger rise, hot and dangerous, and the ship felt it too, systems shifting, energy patterns intensifying. The AI warned of escalation, of probability curves bending toward total war. The alien woman cried out then, pain lacing her voice as the resonance surged beyond her control, every death echoing through her like a physical wound. She was connected now, not mystically but biologically, her evolving state resonating with population clusters, with emotion, with conflict, the galaxy screaming through her nerves. She collapsed to her knees, light flickering violently, and the soldier was there instantly, holding her as space shook, telling her to anchor to him, to one heartbeat instead of billions. She gasped that if the fighting continued she would either burn out or ascend fully, becoming something no one could stop, something that would end the old order by existing. Outside, more fleets arrived, lines drawn, weapons locked, every power calculating whether to strike now or later, whether to kill the future or claim it. A broadcast cut through the chaos, ancient and universally recognized. The challenge had been accepted by another claimant, a rival bloodline long suppressed, awakening. Their own dormant champion in defiance of the protocol, declaring that if destiny must choose, it would choose through battle. The galaxy teetered. The awakened ship surged forward into the growing maelstrom, not as a weapon but as a focal point, every sensor and soul turning toward it. The human soldier's voice carried across open channels, rough and unpolished, demanding a ceasefire, demanding time, appealing not to law but to consequence. Some listened, many did not. Fire erupted again. Closer this time, shields flaring as impacts hammered the ship, alarms shrieking, hull stress climbing. The alien woman screamed, not in fear but in fury, her glow erupting into blinding radiance, patterns on her skin reshaping again, wings of energy flaring briefly behind her before collapsing. A glimpse of what she could become. Entire fleets recoiled, sensors overloading, crews staring in terror at something beyond doctrine, beyond control. In that moment humanity's shadow stretched long, human colonies and warships across the stars felt the shift. Latent systems activating, ancient seeds responding, AIs waking with new directives, not of conquest but of protection, of standing between power and annihilation. The consequences rippled outward, insurgencies flared, oppressed species rose, old hierarchies cracked. All because one rescue had proven destiny could be disrupted. The soldier held her through the storm, whispering grounding words, promising she would not face this alone. Even as the ship shuddered under sustained fire, the AI issued a final warning that if hostilities continued, the Catalyst Prime's evolution would reach a point of no return, forcing a galactic reset that could kill trillions or rewrite everything. Weapons charged across the void. Commanders made their choices. And in the center of it all, a human soldier and an alien catalyst faced the terrible truth that saving one life might now cost the galaxy its old future, and that the next choice would decide whether what rose from the ashes was freedom or ruin. The storm reached its breaking point, fleets locked in trembling formation, weapons humming with restrained annihilation. The awakened ship battered and burning at the edges yet refusing to fall, drifting at the center of a galaxy that no longer trusted its own rules. Inside, the alien woman shook violently, light surging and collapsing in waves that rattled the hull. Every spike of emotion outside tearing through her like shrapnel, billions of minds brushing the edge of her awareness. Fear and rage and hope bleeding together. Too much, far too much. The human soldier wrapped his arms around her, anchoring her against his chest, ignoring alarms, ignoring pain, focusing on one thing only, her breathing, slowing it with his own, steady and deliberate. The way he had calmed recruits before their first drop. The way he had steadied himself before walking into fire. She sobbed against him, voice breaking as she told him she could feel herself slipping, that the next surge would push her beyond return, that ascension would not be a choice but a reflex, a defense mechanism triggered by collective violence. She begged him then, begged him to let her go, to jettison her in an escape pod, to give the galaxy a target other than humanity. Her words heavy with centuries of conditioning, sacrifice drilled into royalty until it felt like virtue. His heart cracked open at the sound. He pulled back just enough to look at her, hands firm on her shoulders, eyes burning, telling her no, telling her humans did not survive by throwing their people into the dark to make others feel safe. Telling her that if the galaxy wanted a future, it would have to learn to face choice instead of control. The ship lurched as another impact tore through secondary shielding, power bleeding away, the AI warning that containment was failing, that either the Catalyst Prime stabilized or the situation ended catastrophically. Outside, the rival champion revealed itself, a colossal vessel shaped like a crown of blades, its presence oppressive, ancient tech radiating domination, broadcasting a challenge across all channels, declaring that order would be restored through conquest, that evolution would be chained. Fear rippled through allied and neutral fleets alike. Some began to withdraw, others powered weapons in desperation. The galaxy fracturing along lines of terror. The alien woman screamed as the rival presence pressed against her resonance, forcing synchronization, trying to hijack her awakening. Her glow flaring uncontrollably, systems around her shorting out, gravity warping inside the cabin. The human soldier felt himself lifting from the deck, pressure crushing his lungs. Yet he did not let go. He shouted her name, grounding her again and again, telling her to look at him, not the galaxy, not the fleets, not the voices. The AI spoke urgently, explaining that resonance required mutual consent, that ascension could be stabilized if the Catalyst Prime chose a bond freely rather than reacting to threat, that the process demanded trust rather than submission. She looked at him then through tears and blinding light, understanding crashing into her, realizing the terrible truth, that what her people feared was not power but equality, that ascension bound by consent dismantled hierarchy itself. Her hands shook as she cupped his face, asking him if he understood what this meant, that bonding with her would mark humanity forever, that it would invite war and awe and irreversible change. He leaned into her touch, voice steady despite everything, telling her humanity had been marked the moment they chose compassion over safety, that this was simply the galaxy noticing. Outside, the rival champion fired, a weapon designed to erase probability itself, reality screaming as it charged, fleets scattering in panic. Inside, time slowed. The alien woman closed her eyes and made her choice, not out of fear, not out of duty, but out of will. She reached into the resonance and pulled it inward, focusing on one presence, one heartbeat, one stubborn human soul who refused to let go. Light exploded outward, not violently but expansively, a wave of harmonized energy rolling through space, shields stabilizing, weapons failing to fire, command systems across fleets freezing as ancient protocols activated, consent overriding domination. The rival champion faltered, systems tearing themselves apart as control logic collapsed, its attack dissolving into harmless light. The human soldier cried out as the energy passed through him, pain and clarity intertwined, memories flooding his mind not as visions but as understanding, lives connected, futures branching. The galaxy suddenly vast and intimate at once. When the light faded, the ship was whole again, systems humming with new strength, the fleets outside silent, stunned, weapons powered down across multiple armadas, commanders staring at readouts that no longer obeyed tyranny. The alien woman slumped forward, exhausted but alive, glow soft and stable. Patterns along her skin settled into a calm, radiant symmetry. She laughed weakly through tears, telling him it worked, that the resonance had stabilized, that ascension had occurred without domination, without collapse. He held her, forehead against hers, laughing too, shaking with relief and aftermath. Across the galaxy, a new truth settled in, ancient hierarchies cracked beyond repair, control-based systems failing quietly, worlds realizing they were no longer bound by fear written generations ago. The danger was not gone. War would still come, consequences would still unfold, but something fundamental had changed. A human soldier had refused to let destiny decide alone, and an alien catalyst had chosen freely, and together they had pulled the galaxy back from the edge. Even as the final chapter of their story prepared to ignite, the galaxy did not erupt into celebration. It never did after moments that rewrote existence. Instead, it breathed out slowly, like something wounded that had decided to live. Fleets held position in stunned silence, commanders staring at systems that no longer obeyed old hierarchies, laws rewritten not by decree but by refusal to submit. Inside the awakened ship, the quiet felt fragile and sacred, the kind that followed storms and funerals and births all at once. The human soldier sat with his back against the bulkhead, the alien woman resting against him, her glow now gentle and steady, no longer flaring in pain or fear, but warm like a living star at rest. She traced the scar on his temple with careful fingers, marveling at its permanence, telling him softly that she could no longer feel the galaxy screaming in her veins, that the noise had settled into distance, into choice, and with it came something she had never known, peace. He smiled tiredly, telling her humans were terrible at peace but good at guarding it once they earned it. Across open channels, messages began to arrive, not demands but questions, worlds asking what came next, how to live without the chains they had mistaken for order, how to build futures without fear holding the blueprint. The AI spoke then, its voice no longer cold but resonant, announcing the end of the Catalyst Protocol, declaring that ascension through domination was no longer possible, that evolution bound by consent had overwritten ancient control architectures across the stars. Empires trembled, some in rage, some in relief. The alien woman closed her eyes as the truth settled fully. She was no longer a bargaining piece, no longer a princess shaped for sacrifice. She was a beginning, not for rule but for possibility, and that terrified her more than chains ever had. She turned to the human soldier and asked him what he would do now, knowing that returning her would ignite politics and propaganda, knowing that keeping her close would paint humanity as guardians of a new age, targets for every power that still clung to control. He thought of Earth, of dust and oceans and cities built on stubborn hope, of soldiers who had stood the line so others could choose their lives freely, of a forest where he had run toward danger because leaving had felt worse. He told her he would go home eventually, but not yet, that some lines were meant to be walked forward, not retreated from, that humanity had never asked to be special, but it had always answered when someone needed to be protected. She smiled then, a real smile, not the practiced curve of royalty, and leaned into him, telling him she would stand with humanity not as its queen or its weapon but as its ally. It's proof that the galaxy could change without burning itself down. Outside, fleets slowly dispersed, some returning to shattered capitals, others staying to witness what came next, observers recording the quiet miracle of restraint. The rival champion drifted dark and powerless. Its threat ended not by destruction but by irrelevance. Weeks passed measured by jumps and negotiations and careful first steps. Worlds once silent spoke freely. Alliances formed around mutual consent rather than threat. Human ships arrived not as conquerors but as mediators, standing where fear once ruled. And always at the center of it all was a simple truth that spread faster than propaganda ever could. That a single human had chosen rescue over obedience, and an alien had chosen trust over destiny. In a quiet moment far from fleets and councils, the soldier stood with her beneath an artificial sky aboard the ship that had changed with them, stars drifting gently overhead. He asked her what she wanted now, not as catalyst, not as symbol, but as herself. She took a long breath, savoring the freedom of the question, and said she wanted to see worlds without being worshipped or feared, to walk without guards, to choose where she stood, to learn what it meant to live rather than represent. He nodded, offering a crooked smile, telling her humans were very good at wandering. Together they watched the stars, not stretching into lines this time, but steady and infinite. Destiny no longer a chain pulling them forward but a horizon they could approach at their own pace. Somewhere far away histories were being rewritten, wars delayed, futures salvaged. But here, in the quiet aftermath of a rescue that became a revolution, a human soldier and an alien who had outgrown her crown sat side by side, knowing the galaxy would never be the same, not because of power, but because someone had finally chosen to care.